In the high-stakes world of World War II aviation, innovation could be the difference between victory and defeat. Engineers were racing against time, pushing the limits of what was possible. But what happens when ambition overshadows practicality? The ARADO AR-240 was a plane designed to dominate the skies with revolutionary technology, yet it never lived up to its promise. In this fascinating tale, we explore how a bold vision for a multi-role aircraft turned into a sobering lesson in the realities of wartime engineering. This is the story of how even the most advanced designs can fall from the skies. A plane that was there at the beginning of the war, stuck it out through all the chaos, and was still flying around at the bitter end. Nope, we're not talking about the Junkers Ju-88, even though it checks all those boxes. Instead, we're putting the spotlight on the Messerschmitt Bf-110. First flown back in May 1936, the Bf-110 was part of a fascinating global trend, militaries experimenting with larger twin-engine fighter designs. You know, the bigger is better mentality. More engines, more range, more weapons, and ideally, more speed. The dream was to create a versatile, unstoppable aerial predator. The reality? A flying brick that sometimes struggled to even turn in time to say hello to its smaller, nimbler enemies. But hey, don't let the poor aerobatics fool you. The Bf-110 found ways to shine. It became a bomber-destroyer, a night fighter, and a Swiss Army knife of the skies. Buckle up, this story is about to take flight. To understand the Messerschmitt Bf-110's place in history, we need to step back to the mid-1930s, a time when the world's militaries were as busy dreaming about the future of air combat as they were building it. Fighter aircraft were evolving quickly, and the concept of the heavy fighter was all the rage. Think of it like aviation's version of bodybuilding. More engines, more guns, and a whole lot of swagger. The idea was simple. Slap two engines onto a larger frame, and you'd have a plane that could fly further, carry more weapons, and maybe even outrun its enemies. In theory, this would create the ultimate multi-role combat aircraft. Part fighter, part bomber escort, part, well, whatever the mission needed. Germany, never one to sit out an arms race, jumped on the bandwagon with gusto. Enter the Messerschmitt Bf-110, a design meant to fill this ambitious role. The Bf-110's development began in the mid-1930s, with its first flight taking place in May 1936. At the time, Germany's Luftwaffe was busy rearming and flexing its muscle, much to the dismay of the rest of Europe. Heavy fighters like the Bf-110 were seen as key to Luftwaffe dominance, providing long-range escort to bombers and firepower to match anything the Allies could throw at them. But here's the catch. Heavy fighters, including the Bf-110, had a bit of an identity crisis. They were larger and less agile than single-engine fighters, which made them vulnerable in dogfights. All the extra weight from the engines and armament didn't help either. Imagine bringing a great white shark to a boxing match. Impressive, but maybe not ideal. That said, the Bf-110 wasn't without its strengths. Its larger frame allowed for greater firepower and versatility, which made it effective in certain roles. As a bomber-destroyer, the Bf-110 was equipped to take down heavily armored enemy bombers with ease. It also proved valuable as a night fighter later in the war, using its size to carry early radar systems for hunting enemy planes in the dark. While the Bf-110 faced tough competition from faster, more maneuverable Allied fighters, it held its own in various specialized roles. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was reliable, durable, and adaptable. And in the high-stakes chess game of World War II, that made all the difference. So, was the Bf-110 a flying triumph or a winged misfit? Well, let's just say it was complicated, like most things in history. Let's dive deeper and see what made this aircraft tick. Just when you thought the skies of aviation history couldn't get any busier, in swoops ARADO, the lesser-known but undeniably stylish cousin at Germany's aeronautical family reunion. While Messerschmitt was busy crafting the Bf-110, a two-engine fighter brimming with ambition, ARADO entered the picture with designs of its own, adding a layer of intrigue to the development of Germany's warplanes. ARADO Flugzeugwerke, an aircraft manufacturer with a knack for innovation, was no stranger to the Luftwaffe's grand ambitions. Known for producing elegant seaplanes and cutting-edge trainers, ARADO wasn't exactly the rock star of German aviation, but they had a way of showing up with the unique ideas. By the mid-1930s, with the winds of war beginning to stir, ARADO found itself tasked with competing against the likes of Messerschmitt and Heinkel for government contracts. Talk about pressure. When the Luftwaffe issued its call for a long-range, multi-role fighter to dominate European skies, ARADO threw its hat into the ring. Their proposal, the ARADO AR-240, 240 was intended to challenge the Bf-110 for the title of Germany's airborne Swiss Army knife. Sleek, modern, and bristling with potential, the AR-240 aimed to improve on the weaknesses of its heavy fighter predecessors. At first glance, the AR-240 seemed promising. It featured advanced aerodynamic designs, twin engines, and enough firepower to make even the most seasoned bomber pilots sweat. ARADO's engineers even included innovative features like pressurized cabins and remotely operated defensive turrets, making it look more like a sci-fi concept than a warplane of its time. But as with any good underdog story, there were challenges. The ARADO AR-240 was plagued with technical issues from the start. Stability problems during flight tests caused more than a few headaches, and delays in development meant that the Bf-110 had already taken the spotlight. By the time ARADO got its act together, the Luftwaffe's priorities had shifted, and their fancy new plane was left waiting in the wings. Still, ARADO's contributions weren't in vain. The lessons learned from the AR-240 would influence later designs and provide valuable insights into the future of German aircraft engineering. While it may not have dethroned the Bf-110, ARADO's bold attempt showed that competition in the skies was as fierce as ever. Prototyping an aircraft is a bit like building a roller coaster while blindfolded. You're not entirely sure how the ride will end, but you hope it's thrilling and not a total disaster. For ARADO, the AR-240 was their ticket to ride, an ambitious project loaded with potential and enough innovation to turn heads. But, as they quickly learned, the path from drawing board to takeoff wasn't a smooth flight. The story of the AR-240 prototype began in the late 1930s, as ARADO engineers rolled up their sleeves and got to work on what was supposed to be a game changer. The Luftwaffe had made it clear they wanted a multi-role aircraft capable of excelling in reconnaissance, bombing, and fighting. Sure, no pressure, ARADO probably muttered as they sketched the blueprints. The prototype, officially designated the ARADO AR-240V1, took its first tentative steps into the skies in 1940. It was sleek, modern, and packed with bells and whistles that had never been seen before on a German aircraft. Notable features included a pressurized cockpit for high-altitude flights, something that was more future tech than standard for the time. Additionally, the remotely operated defensive turrets were like something out of a science fiction novel, a bold departure from traditional gunner stations. Yet, for all its futuristic flair, the AR-240's debut wasn't without its hiccups. The plane suffered from stability issues during testing, earning it the dubious distinction of being a bit of a handful for pilots. Engineers tried to address the problems by tweaking the tail design and adjusting the wing configuration, but the fixes often introduced new complications. It was like playing a high-stakes game of whack-a-mole with aerodynamics. Despite the turbulence, ARADO didn't give up. They pressed forward with additional prototypes, each one slightly better than the last. The AR-240 V2 and V3 introduced improvements in handling and performance, though the aircraft still lagged behind competitors in terms of reliability. Meanwhile, the clock was ticking, and the Luftwaffe wasn't known for its patience. While the AR-240 prototypes were undeniably advanced for their time, they were also plagued by overambition. It became clear that cramming every imaginable feature into a single airframe came at a cost. But in the world of aviation, every failed prototype carries lessons, and the AR-240 was no exception. It was a stepping stone to the future, even if it never reached full production glory. If the ARADO AR-240 story were a movie, the variants and development chapter would be the montage scene, the one where the engineers frantically scribble on blueprints, hammer away at metal frames, and occasionally look skyward with a hopeful gleam in their eyes. In reality, however, it was less a smooth montage and a more chaotic journey through trial, error, and a fair share of head-scratching. The first attempt at refining the AR-240 came in the form of its earliest variants. Following the initial prototypes V1 through V3, ARADO engineers introduced the AR-240 V4 and V5. These were fitted with more powerful Daimler-Benz DB603 engines to address the aircraft's earlier performance issues. It was a classic "more power will fix it" approach, and while it did improve top speed, it also introduced new headaches. Stability remained a recurring villain in the story, much to the chagrin of test pilots. One of the most notable variants was the AR-240 A series, which was envisioned as the production model. ARADO hoped this series would finally capture the Luftwaffe's elusive seal of approval. The A series retained the pressurized cockpit and remote-controlled defense turrets from the prototypes, but incorporated stronger airframes and refined aerodynamics. Despite these improvements, the aircraft still struggled to meet the high expectations set for it. It was like handing in a well-written essay, only to be told it wasn't double-spaced. The development of reconnaissance and heavy fighter roles also led to the experimental AR-240B series. This version was intended to serve as a long-range reconnaissance aircraft with improved endurance. It featured additional fuel tanks and minor adjustments to its fuselage design. Unfortunately, by the time this variant was ready to showcase its talents, the Luftwaffe had already shifted its focus to other, more promising aircraft designs. The AR-240 was starting to feel like yesterday's news. One particularly unusual offshoot of the AR-240 program was the AR-440. This variant was a last-ditch effort to salvage the project by addressing stability issues with an elongated fuselage and redesigned tailplane. Although it showed promise, the AR-440 never advanced beyond the prototype stage, possibly because the Luftwaffe had already labeled the entire ARADO AR-240 project as "thanks, but no thanks." In the end, the ARADO AR-240's myriad variants reflected the relentless pursuit of perfection. Each tweak and redesign was a testament to human ingenuity, even if the end product fell short of its lofty ambitions. Sometimes, the journey is more important than the destination, or at least that's what the engineers told themselves. If the ARADO AR-240 were a contestant on a reality TV show, its evaluation phase would have been the judges' feedback scene, the moment when the glittering dream meets cold, hard reality. Unfortunately for the AR-240, the Luftwaffe judges weren't exactly handing out gold stars. When the aircraft entered formal testing, the Luftwaffe had high hopes for a plane that could do it all: heavy fighter, reconnaissance, dive bomber, and possibly even a Luftwaffe mascot. What they got instead was a temperamental diva that needed constant attention. Test pilots described flying the AR-240 as exciting, which, in aviation parlance, is a polite way of saying nerve-wracking. Stability issues were a recurring theme. The plane's tendency to wobble in the air left pilots feeling like they were riding a mechanical bull rather than a precision war machine. One of the key promises of the ARADO AR-240 was its advanced technology. Pressurized cockpit was a groundbreaking feature, and the remotely controlled defensive turrets were straight out of a sci-fi novel. But as it turned out, futuristic gadgets don't mean much if the basic handling is closer to soapbox derby than dominance in the skies. The complexity of the systems often led to maintenance headaches, and the aircraft's teething problems seemed to multiply with each new prototype. The Luftwaffe's evaluation also noted that while the AR-240 had impressive speed, it lacked the agility required for dogfighting. In a straight line, it could outrun most pursuers, but war rarely involves a convenient stretch of open sky for drag racing. Its potential as a dive bomber also fell flat due to issues with stability during steep dives, a slight problem when the job description includes, well, diving. Then came the final blow: competition. By the time the AR-240 was ready for production, other aircraft had already captured the Luftwaffe's attention. Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf were rolling out designs that were more reliable, less temperamental, and most importantly, already combat-proven. The ARADO AR-240 became the aviation equivalent of an overhyped gadget that everyone lines up to pre-order, only to realize 6 months later that the better options are already on the market. Ultimately, the ARADO AR-240 failed to secure a production contract, sealing its fate as a promising but flawed project. It was a classic tale of ambition colliding with practicality, a reminder that even in the high-stakes world of wartime innovation, not every gamble pays off. The ARADO AR-240 and the Messerschmitt Me-210 were like two rival actors auditioning for the same blockbuster. Both were designed to fill the Luftwaffe's desperate need for a multi-role combat aircraft, but instead of dazzling audiences, they left everyone wondering if the casting director had been asleep on the job. The Me-210 had a head start, being developed earlier, but its own troubled history made it a less than perfect rival. Much like the AR-240, the Me-210 promised versatility, boasting roles as a heavy fighter, dive bomber, and reconnaissance plane. However, its rollout was marred by stability issues, earning it the nickname Messerschmitt's misstep. In an alternate universe, the ARADO AR-240 could have stepped in as the Luftwaffe's hero, but alas, it was more misstep sequel than redemption arc. In terms of performance, the AR-240 outshone the Me-210 in a few key areas, particularly speed and technological sophistication. The ARADO's pressurized cockpit and remotely controlled defensive turrets were innovations that the Me-210 lacked. On paper, this made the ARADO look like the superior contender. However, as the Luftwaffe quickly discovered, Advanced features don't compensate for an aircraft that's as pleasant to fly as a shopping cart with wings. Where the ME-210 eventually clawed its way back to respectability after a series of redesigns, the AR-240 never had its redemption moment. Messerschmitt invested heavily in fixing the ME-210, leading to the much improved ME-410. ARADO, on the other hand, saw its project fizzle out before similar refinements could be made. In the end, both aircraft serve as cautionary tales about overambition and rushed timelines. The ME-210 may have had its flaws, but at least it lived long enough to redeem itself. The AR-240 remains a footnote, a promising prototype that never got its chance to shine. The story of the ARADO AR-240 offers a treasure trove of lessons for engineers, strategists, and anyone who's ever thought, how hard can it be? Spoiler alert, harder than you think. This isn't just a tale of a plane that couldn't take off, metaphorically at least. It's a case study in the perils of ambition unchecked by practicality. First, overloading a design with cutting-edge technology doesn't guarantee success. The AR-240 had a buffet of innovations: pressurized cockpits, remote-controlled turrets, and a sleek design. Yet, it stumbled because basic aerodynamics and handling were sacrificed on the altar of complexity. It's like building a mansion with gold faucets, but forgetting the plumbing. Second, prototypes need time to mature. The AR-240's rushed development left little room for iterative testing or design refinement. In their haste to outpace their enemies, the Luftwaffe ended up with an aircraft that didn't meet their needs. As any baker will tell you, pulling a cake out of the oven too soon leaves you with an inedible mess. Lastly, adaptability is key. While the ARADO team clung to their original vision, competitors like Messerschmitt were reworking and improving their troubled designs. ARADO's inflexibility sealed the AR-240's fate. In a broader sense, the AR-240 reminds us that innovation thrives when paired with practicality and persistence. It's a story of what could have been, and a reminder that sometimes flying too close to the sun leaves you grounded. If you've enjoyed diving into this piece of aviation history, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. What other historical aircraft would you like to see explored? Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Stay curious and keep flying high.